Hey guys, tonight we're exploring a story that everyone in history should know. The story is Joan of Arc facts that seem impossible to believe. You get comfortable. Take a moment, like the video, and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Joan of Arc. Facts that seem impossible to believe. The evening settles gently over the quiet fields of northeastern France, where the wind moves softly through long grasses and small streams reflect the fading colors of the sky. The world grows still. Villagers finish the final tasks of the day. Wooden doors close with familiar sounds, and distant church bells drift across the countryside with a calm rhythm that has marked the passing hours for generations. Imagine yourself walking along a narrow path bordered by wildflowers and small patches of farmland. The air carries the scent of damp earth mixed with fresh hay. Chickens settle into their coops, sheep gather close together, and somewhere nearby, a baker removes the last warm loaves from a stone oven. Nothing about this peaceful village suggests that history is quietly preparing one of its most remarkable stories. Tonight, our journey leads to the life of a young woman whose name has echoed through more than 6 centuries. Her story has inspired artists, historians, soldiers, writers, and ordinary people from many different places. Yet the more closely historians examine her life, the more surprising it becomes. Some facts sound almost impossible to believe, yet careful records left behind by witnesses allow us to understand much of what truly happened. Her name was Joan of Arc. Long before she became known across Europe, she was simply a farmer's daughter, living in the small village of Domremy. It was not a wealthy place. Most families depended upon the changing seasons. They planted crops, cared for animals, repaired fences after storms, and hoped that the harvest would be kind enough to carry them through another winter. Picture yourself standing beside one of those fields just after sunrise. Dew rests upon every blade of grass. A wooden cart creaks slowly down the road, while birds greet the morning from nearby trees. Children help gather water from the village well before beginning their daily chores. Joan grew up in this simple world. One fact that surprises many people is just how ordinary her childhood appears in historical records. There is no evidence that she came from a noble family. She was not raised inside castles or educated by famous scholars. Her father, Jacques d'Arc, owned farmland and worked hard to support his family. Her mother, Isabelle Romay, taught household skills and encouraged religious devotion, as many mothers did during that time. Their home was built for practical living rather than comfort. Thick walls helped protect against winter winds. Smoke from the fireplace slowly drifted upward through the house before escaping outside. Meals were simple, often consisting of bread, vegetables, cheese, and whatever could be produced from the family's land. Life followed familiar patterns. Spring brought planting. Summer required long hours in the fields. Autumn filled the barns with harvested grain. Winter encouraged families to remain close to the warmth of the fire. There was little reason to imagine that one child among the villagers would someday meet kings, command armies, and become one of history's most discussed figures. Yet history often begins quietly. During Joan's childhood, France was facing enormous difficulties. The long conflict we now call the 100 Years' War had already continued for generations. Entire regions experienced uncertainty. Villages sometimes feared raids, changing political control, or shortages caused by war. For ordinary people, these events were not distant stories discussed by scholars. They shaped everyday life. Travel could become dangerous. Crops might be destroyed. Families sometimes fled from approaching soldiers. News traveled slowly, carried by merchants, pilgrims, priests, and travelers moving from town to town. Imagine hearing rumors weeks after events had already happened. Every new visitor might bring another story. Some reports were accurate. Others changed as they passed from one person to another. Joan grew up listening to these conversations. Another remarkable fact seems almost impossible today. Although Joan would later speak confidently with nobles, military leaders, and judges, she probably never learned to read or write fluently. Most historians agree that she was functionally illiterate, which was not unusual for a peasant girl of her time. Yet this never prevented her from displaying extraordinary memory. Witnesses later described how clearly she answered complicated questions during long legal examinations. She remembered conversations, religious teachings, and personal experiences with remarkable consistency. This surprises many modern readers. Education and wisdom are not always the same thing. Joan listened carefully throughout her life. Sermons delivered inside village churches became an important source of learning. Priests explained Bible stories, Christian traditions, and moral lessons through spoken words rather than written books. The church stood at the center of village life. Its bells announced mornings, evenings, weddings, funerals, feast days, and moments of danger. Children learned prayers there. Families gathered there. Important news often spread after religious services. Picture yourself entering that small church. Sunlight filters through simple windows. The smell of old wood mixes with candle wax. Voices rise together in prayer before fading once more into peaceful silence. Joan spent many hours in places like this. One of the most astonishing facts about her life involves the voices she later described hearing. According to her own testimony, these experiences began when she was around 13 years old. She explained that the voices first came during daylight. She also described seeing bright light accompanying them. Modern historians cannot determine the nature of these experiences. Different scholars have offered religious, psychological, neurological, and cultural explanations. None can be proven with certainty. What makes this extraordinary is not simply that Joan reported hearing voices. Many people throughout history have claimed unusual spiritual experiences. The remarkable part is that Joan never changed the central description, even when doing so might have saved her life. Years later, during lengthy trials, highly educated judges questioned her repeatedly. They asked the same subjects from different angles. They searched for contradictions. Yet Joan remained consistent in describing her experiences. Whether one views them through faith, history, or psychology, her consistency remains one of the most carefully documented aspects of her life. Imagine sitting quietly beneath an old tree outside the village. The afternoon sun warms the ground. A gentle breeze moves across the fields. Nearby, distant church bells echo through the countryside. For Joan, moments like these became deeply meaningful. She believed she had received a calling far greater than herself. At first, she did not immediately leave home. This is another detail that often surprises people. Popular stories sometimes make it seem as though Joan instantly marched toward history. Instead, years passed. She continued helping her family. She continued praying. She carefully considered what she believed she had been asked to do. Only gradually did her sense of purpose become stronger. Patience became part of her story. As the seasons continued to pass, France remained divided. The English controlled significant territories. Political disagreements weakened French leadership. Many people feared that the kingdom itself might disappear. Into this uncertain world stepped a teenage girl with no military training. That statement alone almost sounds impossible, yet contemporary records support it. Joan had never commanded soldiers. She had never studied military strategy in the way noble commanders often did. She had never attended military academies because none existed for girls of her social position. Still, she believed she carried an important mission. The people around her did not immediately believe her. Some dismissed her. Others hesitated. Even members of her own community questioned whether such an extraordinary claim could possibly be true. Their doubts seem understandable. Imagine hearing a young village girl calmly explain that she intended to meet the future king of France and help save the kingdom. Most listeners would have struggled to accept such words. Yet Joan continued forward with remarkable determination. She first sought assistance from local officials. At first, she was refused. Again, she returned. Again, she explained her purpose. Persistence slowly opened doors that confidence alone could not. One small conversation eventually led to another. One introduction created another opportunity. History often changes through a chain of ordinary meetings rather than dramatic moments. Eventually, Joan gained support from individuals willing to help her travel toward Chinon, where the uncrowned heir to the French throne, Charles, was staying. The journey itself was extraordinary. Travel across wartime France was dangerous. Roads passed through uncertain territories. Weather changed without warning. Travelers depended upon inns, monasteries, local guides, and the kindness of strangers. Picture yourself riding through cold winter mornings. Your horse breathes clouds into the crisp air. The road disappears into distant forests. Small villages appear one after another before fading behind you. Each mile carries you farther from the familiar fields of childhood. For Joan, there could be no certainty about what awaited at the journey's end. She carried only her faith, her determination, and the quiet belief that she was following the path she had been given. As night slowly settles over the countryside once more, the road ahead stretches toward Chinon, where one meeting, calm, unexpected, and unforgettable, will begin transforming a humble village girl into one of history's most extraordinary figures. The first light of morning slowly spreads across the French countryside, touching rooftops, quiet rivers, and fields that have known centuries of careful work. The world awakens gently. Farmers prepare their tools. Birds begin their familiar songs, and the cool air carries the comforting scent of damp earth after a peaceful night. Imagine yourself riding along a narrow road beside a small group of travelers. Their horses move at an easy pace, their hooves making soft sounds against frozen ground. The journey is long, and each village they pass brings both hope and uncertainty. Somewhere ahead lies the town of Chinon, where an uncrowned prince waits without knowing that history is quietly approaching. Joan had traveled for many days to reach this place. The roads were not smooth, and winter weather often made progress slow. Travelers usually rose before sunrise, hoping to cover many miles before darkness returned. They carried simple food, depended on local hospitality whenever possible, and listened carefully for news about dangerous roads or military movements. As the morning slowly arrives, picture the towers of Chinon Castle appearing above the surrounding landscape. Built upon a rocky hill overlooking the Vienne River, the fortress offered protection as well as a commanding view of the countryside. Within its walls lived advisors, servants, soldiers, nobles, clerks, cooks, and many others whose daily work kept the royal household functioning. Joan entered a world completely different from the quiet village where she had spent her childhood. One of the most astonishing facts about her story concerns her first meeting with Charles, the man who would later become King Charles VII of France. According to long-standing historical accounts, Charles wished to test the young visitor before agreeing to speak with her. He reportedly dressed in ordinary clothing and stood among members of his court, while another nobleman occupied a more prominent position. The idea seemed simple. If Joan truly possessed the guidance she claimed, perhaps she would recognize the real prince. Many people today know this story, yet they often wonder whether it really happened. Historians continue to discuss the exact details because surviving sources were written after the event. Still, the tradition became deeply rooted very early, and several contemporary witnesses believed that Joan correctly identified Charles despite the attempt to conceal him. Whether every detail unfolded exactly as later described remains uncertain. What is certain is that Joan gained a private audience with Charles, and that meeting changed the course of both their lives. Imagine entering a great hall, warmed by enormous fireplaces. Candles flicker against stone walls. Rich tapestries soften the cold interior, while conversations echo beneath high wooden ceilings. Nobles wear fine fabrics dyed in colors rarely seen by ordinary villagers. Servants move quietly between guests, carrying food and warm drinks. Into this impressive setting walks a teenage girl, wearing practical clothing, suited for travel rather than courtly life. She bows respectfully. She speaks calmly. She does not appear overwhelmed by the surroundings. This confidence surprised many observers. Joan later said that she shared with Charles certain private information known only to the two of them. Historians cannot verify exactly what those words were, because no reliable contemporary record preserves the conversation. Yet many people at court believed that something meaningful had taken place, because Charles soon agreed to continue examining her claims instead of dismissing them. Another remarkable fact followed. Before allowing Joan to take any public role, Charles arranged for church officials and learned theologians to question her carefully. This examination took place in the city of Poitiers. For several weeks, Respected scholars asked detailed questions about her beliefs, her experiences, and her understanding of Christian teaching. Imagine yourself sitting inside a quiet stone room. Outside, spring rain falls gently upon the rooftops. Inside, experienced theologians speak one at a time, listening closely to every answer. Joan had never attended a university. She had never studied formal theology. Yet witnesses later described her responses as thoughtful, direct, and sincere. She rarely tried to impress anyone with complicated language. Instead, she answered simply. One question became especially memorable. The scholars asked Joan for a sign proving that her mission truly came from God. Her reply has been remembered for centuries. She essentially answered that the sign would come not in the examination room, but through the lifting of the siege at Orléans. In other words, she asked to be allowed to carry out the mission she believed she had been given. This quiet confidence left a lasting impression. Eventually, Charles accepted that Joan should accompany the French army. Here we encounter another fact that still seems difficult to imagine. Joan did not simply join soldiers as an observer. She was provided with armor. Armor in the 15th century was both expensive and carefully crafted. A complete suit represented considerable value, often beyond the reach of ordinary people. Picture skilled armorers measuring pieces of polished steel. Each section must fit well enough to allow movement while offering protection. The metal catches the light from nearby windows, reflecting bright silver across the workshop. For a farmer's daughter to wear such equipment was extraordinarily unusual. Yet surviving financial records confirmed that armor was indeed prepared for her. Even more surprising, Joan chose to carry a banner during battle. Many people imagine her constantly fighting with a sword. Historical evidence paints a gentler picture. She certainly possessed a sword, and several traditions surround how it was obtained. However, witnesses repeatedly emphasized that Joan preferred carrying her banner. She later explained that she loved her banner far more than her sword because, as she said, it had never killed anyone. That small detail tells us something important about her character. Although she accepted that war surrounded her, she did not seem to delight in violence. Instead, she saw herself as encouraging soldiers and urging them forward. Her banner became one of the most recognizable symbols in the French army. No original version survives today, but descriptions recorded during her lifetime tell us that it was white and decorated with religious imagery, including the names of Jesus and Mary. Imagine the soft fabric moving gently in the spring wind. Soldiers glance toward it as they advance. In a noisy battlefield filled with confusion, a banner could become a point of reassurance, helping people recognize where their companions stood. Another astonishing fact concerns Joan's personal discipline. Contemporary witnesses consistently described her as remarkably devoted to prayer. She encouraged soldiers to attend religious services whenever possible. She urged them to avoid unnecessary swearing. She insisted upon respectful behavior toward civilians. She also preferred that women accompanying the army for prostitution be sent away. These expectations reflected her deeply held religious convictions rather than military custom. Many soldiers found her different from other leaders they had known. Some admired her immediately. Others remained uncertain. Yet gradually her determination earned widespread respect. Picture yourself walking through a military camp as evening approaches. Cooking fires burn quietly beneath iron pots. The smell of bread, onions, and simple stew fills the cool air. Blacksmiths repair damaged equipment, while horses rest after long marches. Nearby, priests offer prayers to groups of tired soldiers. Among them walks Joan, speaking with calm assurance rather than loud commands. She was still only a teenager. That fact becomes even more remarkable the longer one studies her story. Most military commanders gained authority through noble birth, years of experience, or family influence. Joan possessed none of these advantages, yet experienced captains increasingly listened to her. Historians continue debating exactly how much direct military planning she performed. Some argue that veteran commanders made most strategic decisions. Others believe Joan's influence extended further. What is beyond dispute is that her presence transformed morale. Soldiers who had known years of disappointment suddenly believed that change might finally be possible. Sometimes, hope itself becomes a powerful force. As spring deepened in the year 1429, attention turned toward the city of Orléans. The siege had lasted for many months. Its outcome carried enormous importance. If Orléans fell, French resistance would suffer a devastating blow. If it survived, the future might look very different. Imagine standing upon the city walls. Below stretches a landscape marked by defensive positions, watchtowers, camps, and earthworks. The Loire River flows quietly nearby, almost indifferent to the human struggle unfolding along its banks. Within the city, ordinary families continue daily life, despite constant uncertainty. Children still need food. Church bells still mark the passing hours. Bread must still be baked. Water must still be carried. Life continues, even during war. Toward this weary city rode Joan of Arc. She carried no guarantee of success, only faith, determination, and the quiet conviction that her journey was leading exactly where it was meant to go. And as the sun slowly disappears behind the western hills, casting long golden shadows across the waters of the Loire, the gates of Orléans come into view, waiting for the arrival of a young woman whose presence alone would soon begin changing the confidence of an entire nation. The first rays of dawn gently touch the waters of the Loire River, turning the quiet current into a ribbon of pale gold. A cool breeze drifts across the fields surrounding the city of Orléans, carrying the scent of damp soil, fresh grass, and the faint smoke of morning fires rising from cottages beyond the walls. Birds begin their songs as another uncertain day quietly unfolds. Imagine yourself standing upon the city walls before sunrise. The streets below remain mostly silent, though a few bakers have already begun their work. Warm bread slowly fills the air with its familiar fragrance. Nearby, a blacksmith's hammer rings softly through the cool morning, while church bells announce the beginning of another day. Beyond the walls lies the English army. Months of siege have tested everyone inside the city. Food has become more difficult to obtain. Every journey outside the walls carries danger. Families have learned to live with uncertainty, hoping each morning that the city will remain standing for another day. When Joan approached Orléans in the spring of 1429, many people had already heard stories about the young woman from Lorraine. Some believed those stories with quiet hope, Others remained cautious. Rumors often traveled faster than truth during times of war, and people had learned not to trust every tale they heard. Still, something felt different. As Joan's small force drew closer, word spread through the city. The maid had arrived. One remarkable fact that often surprises modern readers is that Joan did not immediately rush into battle upon reaching Orleans. Historical records suggest that experienced military commanders carefully discussed supplies, troop movements, and the safest ways to reinforce the city. Like any medieval campaign, success depended upon planning as much as courage. Picture yourself watching boats move carefully along the Loire. Each carries precious food, weapons, arrows, and other supplies desperately needed inside the city. The river becomes almost as important as the roads themselves. Every successful delivery offers new hope. Joan entered Orleans on the evening of April 29th, 1429. Contemporary accounts describe the welcome as deeply emotional. Citizens crowded the streets despite the late hour. Candles and torches illuminated narrow lanes as people leaned from windows or gathered near church doors, hoping to catch a glimpse of the young woman whose arrival had already become the subject of countless conversations. Imagine walking beside her horse. Children stare with wide eyes. Old men remove their hats. Women whisper quiet prayers. The light from hundreds of flames dances across polished armor as the procession slowly moves through the city. For many people, this was not merely the arrival of another military figure. It was the arrival of hope. Hope can be difficult to measure. It leaves no footprints. It appears in no financial record. Yet historians recognize that morale often shapes history almost as powerfully as weapons. Many soldiers inside Orleans had spent months defending the city. They were exhausted. They had witnessed losses. They had buried friends. Now they saw someone who believed, without hesitation, that the siege could end. That confidence spread quietly from one person to another. Another fascinating fact seems almost impossible today. Joan was only about 17 years old. Many of the captains serving alongside her had spent decades learning warfare. They had fought battles, negotiated alliances, and survived dangerous campaigns. Yet this teenage village girl spoke to them with remarkable assurance. She did not appear arrogant. Rather, witnesses often described her as completely certain of her purpose. Confidence, when joined with humility, can become quietly persuasive. Joan encouraged commanders to act boldly against English positions surrounding the city. Historians continue discussing exactly how much influence she exercised over military planning. Medieval warfare rarely followed the simple narratives that later generations sometimes imagined. Experienced commanders still directed armies. They understood logistics, engineering, and battlefield organization. Yet Joan consistently urged decisive action. Her determination gradually encouraged more aggressive operations. Imagine the sounds of preparation before dawn. Armor buckles click into place, leather straps are tightened, horses stamp their feet impatiently upon the damp ground. Priests quietly offer blessings. The cool air carries almost no conversation. Everyone understands the seriousness of what lies ahead. Joan herself preferred to begin each day with prayer. Witnesses repeatedly remembered her devotion. Before important engagements, She often encouraged confession and religious observance among the soldiers. Whether one shares her beliefs or not, her sincerity impressed those around her. She seemed entirely convinced that spiritual preparation mattered as much as physical readiness. One fact about Joan's behavior during battle is especially remarkable. Although she wore armor and entered dangerous places, witnesses frequently described her carrying her banner rather than using weapons. This detail appears again and again in testimony collected years later. The banner became both a practical signal and a symbol. Where soldiers could see it, they knew Joan remained nearby. Picture the white banner lifting gently in the spring wind. Sunlight catches the fabric as clouds drift overhead. Its movement provides reassurance amid confusion. Sometimes, symbols quietly strengthen the human spirit. As fighting continued around Orleans, several English fortifications gradually fell into French hands. Each success increased confidence. Each victory encouraged more volunteers. Momentum slowly changed. Modern historians emphasize that these achievements resulted from many factors working together: experienced commanders, determined soldiers, improved coordination, effective supply efforts, and Joan's extraordinary influence upon morale. History rarely depends upon one person alone, yet occasionally one individual helps many others believe that success has become possible. Another astonishing event occurred during the campaign. Joan was struck by an arrow. This injury is firmly supported by historical evidence. During an attack on one English position, an arrow pierced her shoulder near the neck. Imagine the sudden silence that must have filled the hearts of nearby soldiers. Their inspiring leader had fallen. For a brief moment, uncertainty returned. Joan withdrew while the wound received attention. Medieval medicine was limited. Removing an arrow required courage as much as skill. The pain must have been considerable. There were no modern anesthetics, no antibiotics. Recovery depended largely upon the body's own strength. Many expected Joan to remain away from the fighting. Instead, after some time had passed, she returned. Witnesses later described seeing her once again carrying her banner. Whether every detail of these accounts can be reconstructed perfectly is impossible to know. But contemporary testimony consistently agrees that her return greatly encouraged the army. Imagine the evening light stretching across the battlefield. The sounds of combat gradually lessen. Then, in the distance, familiar voices begin spreading one simple message: the maid has returned. Sometimes courage is not the absence of fear. Sometimes it is simply choosing to continue despite pain. As the days passed, the English gradually abandoned the siege. On May 8, 1429, after many difficult months, Orleans was free. Church bells rang throughout the city. People gathered in thanksgiving. Families embraced one another. Ordinary life, though still shaped by war, suddenly seemed filled with new possibility. Picture yourself walking slowly through the streets that evening. Candles glow inside open windows. The smell of fresh bread returns to neighborhoods that had known anxiety for so long. Children laugh again in places where silence had often replaced play. The city breathes more easily. One victory did not end the 100 Years' War. Far from it. Many challenges still lay ahead. Yet historians widely agree that the lifting of the Siege of Orleans became one of the great turning points in French history. Another surprising fact followed almost immediately. Instead of remaining to celebrate, Joan urged continued action. She believed momentum should not be wasted. French commanders soon launched what historians now call the Loire Campaign. Town after town became the focus of new operations. Jargeau, Meung-sur-Loire, Beaugency, Patay. Each name marked another step along a road that only months earlier had seemed almost unimaginable. Imagine riding once more beneath wide summer skies. Fields rippled gently beneath the breeze. Wildflowers bloom beside quiet roads. Church towers appear above distant villages. The rhythm of travel continues, but now it carries a growing sense of confidence. Soldiers who had once expected defeat begin speaking softly about victory. Joan never claimed these successes belonged to her alone. Throughout surviving testimony, she consistently directed praise toward God rather than herself. Whether viewed from a religious or historical perspective, this humility remained one of her defining characteristics. She did not seek wealth. She did not ask for noble titles. She did not build a great estate. Her focus remained fixed upon the mission she believed she had received. As evening settles gently over the peaceful Loire Valley, the roads ahead begin leading toward an even greater destination. Far beyond the quiet villages and rolling vineyards stands the ancient city of Reims. There, inside one of Europe's most magnificent cathedrals, a ceremony centuries old awaits. If Joan's hopes are fulfilled, France will soon witness the crowning of its king. And that moment, too, will leave behind facts that still seem almost impossible to believe. The gentle warmth of early summer settles across the valleys of central France. Morning mist rises slowly from quiet rivers, drifting between rows of trees before fading beneath the growing light. Birds welcome the new day with calm melodies, while farmers once again begin their familiar routines. Wooden carts creak along country roads, horses graze peacefully in open fields, and the distant ringing of church bells reminds every village that another ordinary day has begun. Imagine yourself walking beside one of those quiet roads. The grass is still wet with dew. Wildflowers sway gently in the breeze, and somewhere nearby a shepherd quietly watches over a small flock of sheep. Nothing about the peaceful countryside suggests that one of the most important journeys in French history is quietly unfolding. After the victory at Orleans and the successful Loire campaign, Joan believed that the time had come for Charles to travel to the city of Reims. This was not simply another destination on a map. Reims held a special place in the history of France. For centuries, French kings had traditionally been crowned there. The ceremony carried enormous symbolic importance. A king who had been crowned at Reims gained a stronger sense of legitimacy in the eyes of many of his subjects. Yet there was one great difficulty. The road to Reims was far from safe. Several towns along the route remained uncertain in their loyalties. Some supported the English alliance. Others waited cautiously to see which side appeared stronger. Every mile carried political as well as military risk. Picture yourself studying a hand-drawn map spread across a heavy wooden table. Candles flicker softly as advisors discuss possible routes. Small rivers, forests, bridges, and fortified towns shape every decision. In the 15th century, travel was never as simple as choosing the shortest path. Joan strongly encouraged Charles to continue. She believed the journey should not be delayed. Many experienced advisors worried that the risks were too great. Their concerns were understandable. If the expedition failed, the consequences could be severe. Still, confidence had changed dramatically since the spring. News of recent victories spread steadily from village to village. Some communities opened their gates peacefully rather than resist the advancing French forces. One of the remarkable facts about this campaign is that several important towns surrendered without major battles. Sometimes the reputation of an army proved almost as powerful as its weapons. As stories of Joan's victories traveled across the countryside, uncertainty began influencing local leaders. Many preferred negotiation instead of conflict. History often changes through decisions that leave very little physical evidence behind. A gate quietly opened. A messenger carried peaceful terms. A commander chose caution over battle. These quiet moments rarely become famous, yet they shape events just as surely as great victories. Imagine approaching one of these medieval towns during the early hours of the morning. Its stone walls rise above nearby fields. A few guards watch silently from the towers. Then, instead of hearing the sounds of battle, you notice movement at the main gate. Slowly, the heavy wooden doors begin to open. The road ahead continues without bloodshed. For the people living inside these towns, peaceful surrender often meant fewer homes destroyed, fewer families separated, and fewer lives lost. Joan consistently hoped to avoid unnecessary violence whenever possible. This brings us to another surprising fact. Before several military actions, she sent letters encouraging opponents to leave peacefully. Some of these letters have survived. In them, Joan urged English forces to withdraw from France. Her language reflected deep religious conviction and firm confidence in her mission. Modern readers sometimes imagine medieval warfare as endless fighting, yet leaders frequently exchanged messages before battles began. Words often traveled before swords. As the days passed, Charles and his supporters continued their progress toward Reims. Imagine riding beneath broad summer skies. Fields of grain rippled gently beneath the wind. Small villages appear beside winding streams. Children pause from their games to watch the royal procession pass. Some kneel respectfully. Others simply stare with quiet curiosity. Many have never before seen members of the royal court. For Joan, each mile brought the fulfillment of something she believed had been promised years earlier. When she was still a young girl in Domremy, she had said that Charles would one day be crowned. Now that moment seemed increasingly close. One fact that continues to amaze historians is how quickly public opinion had changed. Only months earlier, Joan had struggled to convince local officials to believe her. Now, nobles, soldiers, clergy, and ordinary villagers watched her with growing respect. Reputation can change remarkably fast during extraordinary times. Eventually, the royal procession reached Reims. Imagine approaching the great cathedral as its towers rise above the surrounding city. Even from a distance, the building appears magnificent. Its soaring stone walls, graceful arches, and intricate carvings reflect generations of skilled craftsmanship. Construction had taken many decades. Countless masons, sculptors, carpenters, and glassmakers had devoted their lives to creating this remarkable place. Picture yourself stepping inside. The air feels pleasantly cool after the warmth outside. Colored light filters through stained glass windows, painting soft patterns across ancient stone floors. The scent of beeswax candles blends with traces of incense lingering from earlier services. Voices echo gently beneath the high vaulted ceiling before fading into quiet stillness. On July 17, 1429, Charles was crowned King Charles VII. This event is firmly established by contemporary records. Joan stood nearby during the ceremony. According to witnesses, after the coronation, she knelt before the newly crowned king. She is said to have spoken words expressing that God's will had been fulfilled. Whether every sentence remembered by later writers is perfectly exact cannot be known with certainty. Yet there is little doubt that the moment carried profound meaning for her. Imagine the cathedral bells beginning to ring. Their deep voices spread across the rooftops of Reims. People gather in streets and marketplaces. Merchants pause their work. Families smile quietly. For many, the ceremony represented more than the crowning of a king. It suggested that France itself might finally be moving toward renewal. Another astonishing fact followed soon afterward. Despite her growing fame, Joan remained remarkably simple in her personal habits. Witnesses repeatedly described her modesty. She did not seek luxurious clothing. She continued attending religious services whenever possible. She often spoke kindly with ordinary people, rather than surrounding herself only with nobles. Many who met her commented upon her sincerity. Perhaps one of the most surprising details concerns her family's future. Because of Joan's extraordinary service, King Charles later granted her relatives exemption from certain taxes. For a peasant family, this was an exceptional honor. The privilege remained in effect for many years. Imagine Jacques d'Arc and Isabelle Romée back in Domremy. They had once watched their daughter help with farm work, tend animals, and walk the same village paths every day. Now the king himself had publicly recognized their family. Life must have seemed almost impossible to understand. Yet Joan herself never appeared interested in personal advancement. Again and again, contemporary evidence suggests that her attention remained fixed upon what she believed still needed to be accomplished. She hoped that Paris could also be brought under Charles's control. Here the story begins to change. History rarely moves in a straight line. Moments of triumph are often followed by unexpected difficulties. The unity that had carried recent victories slowly became more complicated. Political disagreements returned. Military leaders sometimes differed about strategy. Resources remained limited. The optimism that had filled Reims could not remove every obstacle. Imagine the quiet evening after the celebrations have ended. The cathedral stands peacefully beneath the fading sky. Candles burn softly inside nearby homes. The sounds of distant conversation drift through narrow streets. Above everything, the stars slowly begin appearing one by one. Joan looks toward the road ahead. Her mission, she believes, is not yet complete. She cannot know what awaits her. She cannot know that within a single year, the extraordinary series of victories that carried her from a quiet farming village to the coronation of a king will begin giving way to trials unlike anything she has yet faced. The gentle summer breeze continues moving across the fields beyond Reims, carrying with it both hope and uncertainty, as history quietly prepares the next chapter of Joan of Arc's remarkable life. The warmth of summer lingers gently across the countryside as golden fields sway beneath a quiet breeze. Harvest time is drawing closer, and throughout the villages of France, ordinary life continues its familiar rhythm. Farmers sharpen their sickles. Bakers prepare bread before sunrise. Children carry water from village wells, while church bells softly welcome another peaceful morning. Imagine yourself standing beside a quiet country road just after dawn. A thin layer of mist hangs above the fields before slowly disappearing into the growing sunlight. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster announces the new day. The world feels calm, almost untouched by the great events unfolding beyond the horizon. Only weeks have passed since Charles VII was crowned at Reims. For many people, it seemed as though the hardest days were finally ending. Yet history often reminds us that victories do not always bring immediate peace. Joan believed her work was unfinished. She hoped the kingdom could be reunited more completely, and that the long years of conflict might finally begin drawing toward their conclusion. Picture yourself traveling once more with the royal army. The roads stretch across rolling hills and quiet forests. Horses move steadily through the summer heat. Soldiers speak in relaxed voices during the long marches, their confidence much stronger than it had been only a few months earlier. Many of them now believed that almost anything was possible. Confidence is a remarkable companion. It gives strength during difficult journeys. But it can also encourage expectations that reality cannot always satisfy. One surprising fact about Joan's life after the coronation is that her influence may already have begun to change. During the dramatic months leading to Reims, many commanders had welcomed bold action. Now, political advisors increasingly preferred negotiation. The newly crowned king faced complicated decisions that extended far beyond the battlefield. Every military campaign affected diplomacy. Every victory carried financial costs. Every march required food, supplies, horses, and thousands of ordinary people working quietly behind the scenes. Imagine a group of royal clerks sitting inside a candlelit chamber. Sheets of parchment cover a heavy oak table. Quills scratch softly as they record expenses, messages, and military reports. Outside, the sounds of the city drift faintly through open windows. History is not written only by famous names. It is also shaped by countless unknown hands. Joan continued urging swift action. She believed Paris should be recovered. At that time, Paris remained under the control of forces loyal to the English alliance. Recovering the city would have carried enormous symbolic importance. Many soldiers shared Joan's enthusiasm. Others urged caution. Military leaders understood that large cities were difficult to capture. High walls, experienced defenders, and limited supplies could quickly transform confidence into disappointment. Imagine approaching Paris from the countryside. Its walls rise above the surrounding landscape. Church towers reach into the late summer sky. Markets continue operating inside the city, while watchmen observe every movement beyond the gates. The city appears calm, Yet everyone understands that uncertainty surrounds it. Joan joined the campaign toward Paris with the same quiet determination that had guided her since leaving Domremy. Witnesses continued describing her remarkable discipline. She rose early. She prayed often. She remained respectful toward those around her. Despite growing fame, there is little evidence that she became proud or distant. Another remarkable fact often surprises modern readers. Although Joan had become famous across France, she was still only about 17 years old. Many of the nobles around her had children close to her own age. Yet these experienced men now found themselves discussing military plans alongside a young woman who had spent most of her life tending animals and helping on a family farm. History offers few stories quite like hers. As the army advanced, negotiations occasionally interrupted military operations. Temporary truces slowed the campaign. Political discussions became increasingly important. For Joan, these delays proved frustrating. She believed valuable opportunities were slipping away. Imagine waiting inside a military camp during late summer. The evenings arrive a little earlier now. Cooking fires glow softly beneath darkening skies. Soldiers repair boots, sharpen tools, and quietly exchange stories from home. Days pass without major action. Waiting can become its own kind of challenge. Eventually, an assault was launched against part of Paris's defenses. The fighting proved difficult. The city's fortifications were strong, and the defenders resisted stubbornly. During the attack, Joan suffered another serious wound. Historical sources record that a crossbow bolt struck her in the thigh. Picture the afternoon sunlight fading as the battle continues. Dust hangs in the warm air. The sounds of shouting echo across the defensive walls. Then, amid the confusion, Joan is injured. Even after being wounded, witnesses reported that she remained near the fighting for many hours, encouraging the soldiers around her. Only when darkness made further progress impossible did the attack come to an end. This determination became one of the defining characteristics remembered by those who knew her. She rarely asked others to face dangers that she herself refused to share. Still, courage alone could not overcome every obstacle. The assault on Paris failed. Soon afterward, the campaign gradually lost momentum. This marked an important turning point. One fact that seems almost impossible to believe is how quickly fortune can change. Only a short time earlier, Joan had stood beside the newly crowned king inside the magnificent cathedral at Reims. Now the army was withdrawing. Momentum had slowed. Political disagreements became more visible. History seldom moves in a straight line. It advances. It pauses. Sometimes it even seems to step backward before moving forward once again. Imagine the quiet journey away from Paris. Autumn begins touching the leaves with shades of gold and amber. The mornings grow cooler. Mist settles across rivers before sunrise. The rhythm of hoofbeats becomes almost meditative as the army slowly travels through the changing countryside. Joan did not abandon her sense of purpose. She continued taking part in smaller military operations during the months that followed. Some succeeded. Others accomplished little. The great wave of victories that had transformed the spring and summer gradually became more difficult to sustain. Another fascinating detail concerns the honor that Charles VII granted Joan around this period. he officially ennobled Joan and her family. For a peasant household from Domremy, this represented an extraordinary transformation. The family was permitted to use a coat of arms. Such recognition was exceptionally rare. Imagine news reaching the quiet village where Joan had once watched sheep graze beside peaceful streams. Neighbors who remembered her childhood now heard that the king himself had elevated her family. The contrast must have seemed almost beyond belief. Yet despite these honors, Joan herself continued living simply. No evidence suggests that she sought comfort or luxury. Instead, witnesses repeatedly remembered her devotion, modesty, and unwavering sense of duty. As autumn slowly deepened, the roads became wetter after seasonal rains. Travel grew more difficult. Fields that had been bright with summer grain now lay harvested beneath gray skies. The smell of wood smoke drifted from village chimneys each evening. People quietly prepared for another winter. Joan, however, remained on the move. She believed there was still important work ahead. She could not know that the months before her were leading toward one of the most difficult chapters of her life. Not through defeat alone, not through injury alone, but through betrayal, captivity, and a trial that historians would continue studying for centuries. As the evening grows quiet and the last birds settle into the trees, the roads of northern France stretch onward beneath a sky slowly filling with stars. Somewhere ahead waits the town of Compiègne, where a single afternoon will change the course of Joan's life forever. The cool breath of autumn settles gently over northern France. Morning arrives a little later now, and a silver mist lies quietly across rivers, meadows, and harvested fields. The busy season of gathering grain has ended in many villages. Barns are full where the harvest has been kind, and families prepare their homes for the colder months ahead. Smoke rises slowly from stone chimneys, carrying the comforting scent of burning oak into the still morning air. Imagine yourself walking along a narrow woodland path just after sunrise. Fallen leaves soften every footstep. Tiny drops of dew rest upon spider webs stretched between low branches, shining briefly before the sun climbs higher into the sky. Somewhere nearby, a woodcutter swings his axe with a steady rhythm, while distant church bells gently welcome another peaceful day. Yet beyond this quiet countryside, the long struggle for France continues. Although Charles VII had been crowned, the war was far from over. Many important towns remained outside his control, and alliances shifted as political leaders searched for the safest path through uncertain times. Joan remained determined. Her purpose, as she understood it, had not changed. She still believed she should help defend the kingdom. One remarkable fact about this period is that Joan did not disappear from public life after the great victories of 1429. Popular stories sometimes suggest that her mission ended with the coronation at Reims. In reality, she continued participating in military campaigns, traveling from town to town, encouraging soldiers, and supporting efforts to strengthen the king's position. Picture yourself riding beside a small company of mounted soldiers. The roads are muddier than they were during the dry summer months. Horse hooves sink into damp earth, leaving deep prints behind. Small villages appear between forests, their wooden fences weathered by many seasons. Children pause from gathering firewood to watch the riders pass. For them, The war is not simply a story. It is part of everyday life. As the morning slowly arrives, our journey brings us toward the town of Compiègne. Situated beside the Oise River, Compiègne held great strategic importance. Whoever controlled the town could influence movement through the surrounding region. Defending it mattered greatly to those loyal to Charles VII. Joan traveled there during the spring of 1430. She hoped to assist the town's defenders against forces allied with the English, including soldiers serving under the Duke of Burgundy. Imagine standing upon the town walls. Below, fields stretch toward distant forests. Watchmen scan the horizon carefully. Every movement raises questions. Are those merchants, travelers, or approaching soldiers? In medieval warfare, certainty was often impossible. News traveled slowly. Information could already be outdated by the time it arrived. Another fascinating fact about Joan is that she often shared the same hardships as ordinary soldiers. She did not remain comfortably behind the front lines. Witnesses consistently placed her close to danger. She rode with the troops. She entered contested areas. She accepted risks that many leaders tried to avoid. This willingness earned lasting respect among those who served beside her. Imagine the afternoon of May 23rd, 1430. The sky is bright, though scattered clouds drift lazily overhead. The air carries the scent of fresh grass and newly growing leaves. Beyond the town, armed forces move across the countryside as both sides carefully watch one another. Joan joins a sortie, a military attack launched from within the safety of the town walls. The purpose is limited: strike quickly, push back the opposing forces, then return safely before becoming surrounded. At first, events unfold much as planned. French troops engage their opponents outside the town. But as the fighting develops, additional enemy forces arrive. The situation changes rapidly. Imagine hearing the urgent calls of commanders echoing across the fields. Horses turn sharply. Soldiers begin withdrawing toward the town gates. Dust rises beneath hundreds of hurried footsteps. The calm afternoon gives way to confusion. One of the most astonishing facts in Joan's story occurs during these difficult moments. Rather than immediately retreating, she remained behind to help protect the withdrawal of other soldiers. Whether every detail reported by later witnesses is perfectly accurate cannot be known. But contemporary accounts agree that Joan stayed near the rear of the retreat, encouraging resistance, while others moved toward safety. Acts like this often come at great personal cost. As the French forces withdrew, the gates of Compiègne were closed. Exactly why this happened has been debated for centuries. Some historians believe the commander feared enemy troops would rush into the town if the gates remained open. Others have wondered whether political tensions influenced the decision. The surviving evidence does not allow a definite conclusion. What is certain is that Joan found herself outside the walls. Imagine looking back toward the great wooden gates. They stand closed. Stone towers rise silently above them. Between you and safety stand advancing enemy soldiers. For a brief moment, history balances upon a single afternoon. Joan attempted to continue resisting. But eventually, she was captured. She was only about 19 years old. That simple fact often surprises people. In less than 3 years, she had traveled from an unknown farming village to the courts of kings, helped inspire one of France's greatest military recoveries, witnessed a royal coronation, and now found herself a prisoner. History sometimes changes with astonishing speed. Her captors recognized immediately that they had taken someone extraordinary. Joan was not treated as an ordinary prisoner of war. She represented something much larger. To her supporters, she symbolized hope. To her opponents, she symbolized a dangerous challenge that needed to be discredited. Another remarkable fact concerns what happened after her capture. Contrary to what many people imagine, Joan was not immediately handed over to the English. Instead, she remained in Burgundian custody for several months. During this time, discussions took place concerning her future. Political negotiations became just as important as military decisions. Imagine yourself inside a medieval castle during late autumn. The thick stone walls hold back the growing cold. A fire burns steadily inside the great hall. Messengers arrive one after another, carrying sealed letters across long distances. Every document reflects the complicated politics of 15th century Europe. Joan waited. Waiting can be one of the hardest parts of any journey. Days become weeks. Weeks become months. The uncertainty itself becomes a heavy burden. Historical records suggest that Joan attempted to escape more than once. One particularly famous attempt occurred at the castle of Beaurevoir. According to testimony, fearing she might be handed over to the English, Joan climbed or jumped from a very high tower. The fall was extraordinary. Modern readers often find this difficult to believe. Yet multiple historical sources describe the event. Remarkably, Joan survived. She was injured and shaken, but she lived. How severe her injuries were remains uncertain, yet the simple fact of surviving such a fall amazed even people living at the time. Imagine lying beneath the open sky after such an accident. The wind moves gently through nearby trees. Voices echo above as people rush toward the place where she has fallen. Pain fills every movement, yet life remains. This episode reminds us once again of Joan's remarkable resilience. Time after time, she endured hardships that might have broken many others. As winter slowly approaches, the leaves disappear from the trees. Cold rain replaces warm autumn afternoons. The landscape grows quieter. Fields that once shimmered with grain now rest beneath gray skies. At last, political negotiations reached their conclusion. Joan was transferred into English custody. This decision would lead not to another battlefield, but to a courtroom. There, surrounded not by soldiers, but by judges, clerks, theologians, and officials, she would face questions unlike any she had answered before. The words spoken during those months would be carefully recorded, preserving one of the most detailed personal testimonies left by any ordinary person from the Middle Ages. And those remarkable records still allow us, 6 centuries later, to hear Joan's own voice with surprising clarity. As evening settles quietly over the rivers and forests of northern France, the road ahead no longer leads toward battle. It leads instead toward Rouen, where an extraordinary trial will begin. A trial filled with questions, courage, and facts that continue to astonish historians to this very day. The last leaves of autumn have fallen, and winter quietly settles across the landscape of northern France. Frost clings to rooftops before sunrise, and the fields lie still beneath a pale morning sky. Smoke rises from cottages, where families gather around warm fires, sharing simple meals of bread, soup, and whatever the harvest has provided. Outside, the roads are damp and cold, and travelers wrap themselves tightly against the wind. Imagine yourself walking through the narrow streets of Rouen in the early hours of the day. The city is already awake. Merchants prepare their stalls, apprentices sweep the entrances to workshops, and the distant ringing of church bells echoes between tall stone buildings. The smell of fresh bread mixes with the scent of burning wood, while the nearby Seine River flows quietly through the heart of the city. This is where Joan of Arc's story enters one of its most remarkable chapters. Not upon a battlefield, not inside a royal palace, but within a courtroom. One of the most astonishing facts about Joan's life is that historians possess an unusually detailed record of her trial. Thousands of lines of testimony were carefully written down by clerks as judges questioned her over many weeks in 1431. For someone born into a farming family during the Middle Ages, this is extraordinarily rare. Most ordinary people of that time left almost no personal record behind. Many lived their entire lives without their own words ever being preserved. Yet Joan's answers have survived across the centuries. Because of those documents, we are able to hear her voice more clearly than that of countless kings, queens, and nobles whose lives unfolded during the same period. Imagine entering a large stone chamber lit by narrow windows. The air feels cool even during the day. Wooden benches line the room, and parchment, ink, and feather quills rest upon heavy tables. Clerks prepare themselves carefully, ready to record every important exchange. Joan stands before a group of learned church officials. Most of them have spent many years studying law, theology, and religious doctrine. She has spent her childhood tending animals and helping her family on their farm. The difference in education could hardly have been greater. Yet what followed surprised nearly everyone. Again and again, Joan answered difficult questions with remarkable calmness. One famous moment has been discussed by historians for centuries. The judges asked her a deeply complicated theological question. They wanted to know whether she believed she was in God's grace. To many people today, the question may sound simple, but in the 15th century, it carried enormous religious importance. According to Christian teaching at the time, no ordinary person could claim absolute certainty about being in God's grace. If Joan answered yes, she risked being accused of pride. If she answered no, it could be used as evidence against the divine nature of her mission. It was, in many ways, a trap. Her reply became one of the most famous statements in medieval history. She answered in essence, "If I am not, may God place me there, and if I am, may God keep me there." The room reportedly fell quiet. It was an answer that avoided the trap without abandoning humility. Modern scholars continue to admire the wisdom contained in those few simple words. Imagine the clerks pausing for just a brief moment before dipping their quills once more into dark ink. Every sentence matters. Every answer is carefully written onto parchment. None of them can know that people will still be reading these words nearly 600 years later. Another remarkable fact concerns Joan's memory. The judges questioned her repeatedly. Sometimes they returned to the same subjects days later. Sometimes they asked similar questions in different ways, hoping to discover contradictions. Yet Joan's central account remained remarkably consistent. She continued describing the voices she believed had guided her. She continued identifying them as Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. Whether one views these experiences through the lens of faith, psychology, or history, her consistency remains one of the most striking features of the surviving records. Picture yourself sitting quietly beside a small window as pale winter sunlight falls across the stone floor. Outside, snow begins drifting gently through the cold air. Inside, the questioning continues hour after hour. Joan grows tired, yet she continues answering. Another fact that seems almost impossible to believe is that Joan repeatedly asked for legal assistance. She requested permission to appeal directly to the Pope. Under normal church procedures, such an appeal could sometimes be made. However, her request was not granted. Historians continue studying the legal complexities surrounding her trial. Many believe that important procedural protections normally expected in church courts were not fully observed. These questions would become especially important years later. Despite being a prisoner, Joan continued displaying remarkable confidence. She sometimes corrected her questioners when she believed they misunderstood her words. At other times, she politely declined to answer certain questions. One phrase appears again and again throughout the trial records. She would simply say that she would answer later, or that certain matters belonged only to God. Imagine the quiet strength required to speak so calmly while surrounded by experienced judges who held tremendous authority over your future. Joan was still only 19 years old. Most people of that age are still discovering who they are. Yet here she stood, defending her beliefs before some of the most educated men in France. One small detail preserved in the records offers a gentle glimpse into her character. During the trial, Joan occasionally smiled. Even after months of imprisonment, she had not completely lost her ability to respond with warmth or quiet humor. These brief moments remind us that behind the famous name stood a real young woman. She experienced fear. She grew tired. She hoped. She prayed. She remembered her family. Imagine her thinking of Domremy during those long winter evenings. Perhaps she remembered the sound of sheep grazing in nearby fields. Perhaps she thought of the small church where she had first spent hours in prayer. Perhaps she remembered her mother's voice preparing the evening meal while the fire crackled gently inside their home. Memory often becomes especially vivid during difficult times. As the days passed, pressure upon Joan increased. She was urged again and again to abandon the claims she had made about her divine mission. Those around her hoped she would sign statements rejecting parts of her testimony. The situation became increasingly complicated. Fear, exhaustion, isolation, and uncertainty weighed heavily upon her. Modern historians recognize how extraordinarily difficult these circumstances must have been. Another fascinating fact about the trial is that Joan insisted upon wearing men's clothing while imprisoned. This decision has often been misunderstood. Historical evidence suggests that practical concerns played an important role. She was held under the guard of male soldiers, rather than in a religious prison supervised by women. Her clothing offered additional protection and was more difficult to remove against her will. This practical choice would later become one of the issues discussed during her trial. The details remain complex, and historians continue examining them carefully. Outside the courtroom, winter slowly deepens. Ice forms along the edges of the Seine. The nights become longer. Candles burn later into the evening. Life throughout Rouen continues almost normally. Markets still open. Church services continue. Children still play in narrow streets whenever the weather allows. Meanwhile, inside the prison, Joan waits for whatever tomorrow may bring. As another quiet evening settles over the city, snowflakes drift gently through the cold air, covering rooftops, towers, and silent courtyards in soft white silence. The questioning is nearly finished. Soon, decisions will be made that will shape not only Joan's future, but also the way history remembers her for centuries to come. And in the years that follow, another remarkable chapter will unfold, one that transforms a condemned prisoner into one of the most honored figures in history. The cold of winter lingers quietly over the city of Rouen. Dawn arrives slowly, its pale light slipping between the narrow streets and touching the rooftops with a soft silver glow. Frost clings to wooden doors, and the river moves steadily beneath the gray sky, carrying with it the silent rhythm of another day. Imagine yourself standing beside a small window overlooking the city. The morning is calm. A baker places fresh loaves outside to cool. A blacksmith begins his work with slow, measured strikes of his hammer. Somewhere nearby, church bells ring gently, their familiar sound spreading across the rooftops before fading into the cold air. Life continues. It always does, even when history is quietly unfolding behind thick stone walls. Inside her prison, Joan had now endured months of questioning. The long hours before judges had become part of her daily life. Every answer had been carefully recorded. Every word had been examined. Yet one remarkable fact becomes clearer the more historians study these records. Joan rarely allowed anger to guide her responses. She answered with firmness. Sometimes she answered with quiet confidence. Occasionally, she answered with gentle humor. Even those who disagreed with her often recognized her remarkable composure. Imagine the silence inside a prison cell during the early morning. Only the faint crackling of a nearby fire can be heard somewhere beyond the heavy wooden door. Cold air slips through tiny openings in the stone walls. A single candle burns softly, casting long shadows that move gently across the floor. Joan spends much of her time in prayer. Prayer had accompanied every stage of her journey, from the peaceful fields of Domremy, to the crowded streets of Orléans, to the magnificent cathedral at Reims. And now, within the loneliness of imprisonment. One astonishing fact about Joan's trial concerns the enormous number of people involved. Modern readers sometimes imagine only a few judges sitting inside a courtroom. In reality, dozens of church officials, theologians, lawyers, clerks, and witnesses took part at different stages. The proceedings were extensive. Everything was documented with extraordinary care. Because of that careful record-keeping, historians today possess one of the richest collections of first-hand testimony from the Middle Ages. It is almost as though Joan continues speaking across 6 centuries, Picture yourself watching a clerk carefully sharpen the tip of a feather quill. He pauses only briefly before continuing to write. Every sentence matters. No one in that room realizes that these pages will survive wars, revolutions, fires, and countless generations. History often depends upon small acts of careful work. Another remarkable detail seems almost impossible to believe. During the trial, Joan demonstrated an impressive understanding of practical reasoning, even though she had received almost no formal education. When questions became confusing or deliberately complicated, she often asked her judges to explain themselves more clearly. She refused to guess. She preferred careful answers. That patience impressed even some who opposed her. Imagine sitting quietly while snow falls outside. The world beyond the windows grows almost silent. Only the scratching of quills breaks the stillness. Time seems to move more slowly. Days blend gently into one another. Eventually, the pressure upon Joan became almost unbearable. Historical records show that she signed or marked a short document during one stage of the proceedings. Exactly what she fully understood at that moment remains one of the subjects historians continue discussing. She could not read the Latin text prepared by educated officials. Some scholars believe she understood only a simplified explanation. Others suggest that exhaustion, illness, fear, and the threat of immediate punishment influenced her decision. The surviving evidence cannot answer every question. History sometimes leaves us with uncertainty, and uncertainty is itself part of honest history. For a brief time, it appeared that Joan's life might be spared. Yet another extraordinary event soon followed. Joan resumed wearing the men's clothing she had previously been asked to abandon. The exact reasons remain debated. Several contemporary accounts suggest that her women's clothing had been removed or made unavailable. Others describe practical concerns for her safety inside a prison, guarded by male soldiers. Whatever the precise sequence of events, this decision became one of the central reasons used to continue the proceedings against her. It remains one of the most carefully studied episodes in medieval legal history. Imagine another cold morning inside the prison. The wind whistles softly around the towers. Clouds drift slowly across the gray sky. Joan knows that the future has grown uncertain once again. Still, witnesses continued describing her remarkable calm. She did not suddenly become someone different. She remained deeply devoted to the beliefs she had defended from the very beginning. Another fact that surprises many people is how young she still was. Only 19 years old. When many young people today are only beginning adulthood, Joan had already altered the course of a kingdom, stood beside a king during his coronation, commanded the respect of experienced soldiers, survived battles, imprisonment, and one of the most detailed trials of the medieval world. Her life had unfolded with astonishing speed. Imagine her remembering home. Perhaps she thought about the sound of wind moving through wheat fields. Perhaps she remembered the bells of the little church in Domremy. Perhaps she pictured her father's farm beneath the warm light of summer evenings. Memory often becomes a place of quiet comfort. As May 1431 drew toward its end, the proceedings reached their final stage. On the morning of May 30th, Joan was led from her prison. Historical witnesses described the solemn atmosphere, Clergy gathered, officials assembled, ordinary townspeople watched quietly. The city that had carried on with its daily routines now paused to witness an event that would be remembered for centuries. Imagine the streets unusually silent. The cool morning air carries only the distant ringing of church bells. People remove their hats. Many lower their eyes. Others watch in complete stillness. Accounts written by eyewitnesses describe Joan asking for a cross. An English soldier is said to have fashioned a simple cross from 2 small pieces of wood and handed it to her. Another cross from a nearby church was also brought before her. Whether viewed through faith or history, these details have remained deeply moving for generations. Witnesses later recalled that Joan repeatedly spoke the name of Jesus during her final moments. Several people present, including some who had participated in the proceedings, later expressed deep regret over what had happened. One English official reportedly declared afterwards that they had destroyed a holy person. While historians carefully distinguish between documented testimony and later tradition, it is clear that many eyewitnesses were profoundly affected. The remarkable story did not end there. In many ways, it was only beginning. 25 years later, after political circumstances had changed, a new investigation reopened Joan's case. Witnesses who had known her as a child, soldiers who had served beside her, priests, friends, neighbors. All came forward to testify. Their memories would reshape history. As evening slowly settles over the quiet rooftops of Rouen, the Seine continues its peaceful journey toward the sea, just as it did centuries ago. The young woman from Domremy is gone. But her story has not ended. In the years ahead, judges will reconsider the evidence. The church will reverse its earlier judgment. Generations will remember her with growing admiration. And one day, centuries later, Joan of Arc will become one of the few medieval figures whose life continues to inspire people across the entire world. The seasons continue their quiet cycle, just as they always have. Winter slowly loosens its hold upon the French countryside, and the first signs of spring begin to appear. Tiny green shoots push gently through the soil. Rivers flow a little more freely beneath the warming sun, and birds return to familiar branches that have waited patiently through the cold months. Imagine yourself walking once again along the peaceful lanes of Domremy. The village looks much as it did during Joan's childhood. Smoke rises from the same stone cottages. The small church still welcomes its neighbors with the familiar sound of its bells. Children chase one another beside the village well, while farmers prepare their fields for another planting season. Life continues. Yet the village is no longer quite the same. The young girl who once helped gather firewood and watched sheep graze across these meadows has become part of history. News of Joan's death spread slowly across France. In the 15th century, information traveled at the pace of horses, merchants, pilgrims, and handwritten letters. Some villages learned the news weeks later. Others waited even longer. Imagine a traveler arriving at a roadside inn after several days of riding. As supper is served beside a warm fire, conversations begin. Someone asks about Rouen. Another asks about the king. Then, quietly, the traveler shares the news. The room falls silent. History often reaches ordinary people in moments just like these. One conversation, one traveler, one evening beside the fire. Another astonishing fact about Joan's story is that her influence did not disappear after her death. In many ways, it became stronger. Charles VII continued his efforts to reunite France. Over the following years, the balance of the 100 Years' War gradually shifted. Important victories followed. Territories slowly returned to French control. While historians rightly credit many commanders, diplomats, soldiers, and political leaders for these achievements, they also recognize that Joan's earlier victories had transformed confidence at a crucial moment. Hope, once awakened, can continue long after its first appearance. Imagine standing upon the walls of a peaceful town years later. The sounds of war have grown more distant. Markets once again fill with merchants selling cloth, grain, pottery, and fresh vegetables. Children laugh freely through streets that had once echoed with uncertainty. Life slowly rebuilds itself. One remarkable fact often surprises modern readers. For many years after Joan's death, questions about her trial quietly remained. Those who had known her personally never completely accepted the judgment against her. Friends remembered her honesty. Soldiers remembered her courage. Villagers remembered her kindness. Their memories did not disappear, simply because a court had reached a decision. Memory has a quiet strength of its own. As the years passed, political circumstances changed dramatically. By the middle of the 15th century, Charles VII had regained much of his kingdom. Rouen itself eventually returned to French control. Now, for the first time, it became possible to examine Joan's trial more carefully. Imagine entering another courtroom. This one feels different. The purpose is no longer accusation. It is investigation. Clerks once again prepare ink and parchment. Witnesses once again gather. But this time, they come to remember. One by one, people who had known Joan began sharing their memories. Perhaps the most touching testimony came from the people of Domremy. Neighbors described the young girl they had watched growing up. They remembered her attending church faithfully. They remembered her kindness towards those in need. They remembered her helping her parents with ordinary work. No one described an ambitious child seeking fame. Instead, they remembered a thoughtful young woman whose faith quietly shaped her daily life. Imagine an elderly villager speaking after many years. His hair has turned gray. His hands still bear the marks of a lifetime spent working the land. As he recalls Joan's childhood, the memories return with surprising clarity. He remembers the little paths through the fields. He remembers village festivals. He remembers hearing church bells beside the same river that still flows gently today. History is preserved not only in books, it is also preserved in memory. Another extraordinary fact about the retrial is the number of witnesses who participated. More than 100 people eventually gave testimony. Friends, relatives, priests, soldiers, royal officials, even individuals connected with the original trial. Together, they created one of the richest collections of eyewitness evidence surviving from medieval Europe. Their words allow historians to compare many different perspectives. Some remembered Joan as fearless. Others emphasized her kindness. Many spoke about her remarkable honesty. Again and again, similar descriptions appeared despite the witnesses coming from very different backgrounds. Imagine page after page of carefully written testimony. Each sheet of parchment preserves another voice, another memory, another small piece of a much larger story. The investigation lasted many months. Every detail received careful attention. Legal procedures were examined. Documents were reviewed. Witnesses answered long series of questions. Eventually, in 1456, 25 years after Joan's death, the church officially declared that the original trial had been deeply flawed. Its judgment was overturned. Joan's name was cleared. For her family, this decision carried profound meaning. Imagine Joan's mother, Isabelle Romay. She had traveled to support the effort to reopen her daughter's case. She had lived long enough to hear the church publicly acknowledge that Joan had been wrongly condemned. Few parents experience such a journey. The quiet village mother who had once taught her daughter simple prayers now witnessed the restoration of her child's reputation. History can sometimes move slowly. Truth, too, often requires patience. Another fascinating fact is that Joan's fame continued growing century after century. Artists painted her. Writers told her story. Musicians composed works inspired by her life. Historians continued studying the remarkable trial records. Generals admired her courage. Ordinary people admired her determination. Yet every generation understood her a little differently. Some remembered the soldier. Others remembered the saintly young woman. Others admired the determined teenager who refused to surrender her convictions. Perhaps that is one reason her story has endured. It speaks differently to different people. Imagine the passing centuries. Medieval castles slowly become ancient ruins. New cities grow. Printing presses spread knowledge across Europe. Steam engines appear. Railways cross the countryside. Automobiles replace horse-drawn carts. Airplanes cross the skies. Still, Joan's story remains. Generation after generation continues returning to the quiet fields of Domremy. They continue asking how an ordinary village girl changed the history of an entire kingdom. As evening gently settles once more across France, the stars begin appearing above the same countryside Joan once knew. The rivers continue flowing. The church bells continue ringing. The fields continue welcoming each new spring. And although 6 centuries have now passed, one final chapter still remains. It is the chapter that explains how a young woman once condemned by a court would eventually be honored by millions around the world, becoming one of history's most enduring symbols of courage, faith, and quiet determination. The morning arrives gently over the rolling countryside of eastern France. A soft mist rises from quiet streams, and the first light of dawn slowly paints the fields in shades of pale gold. Birds greet the new day from the branches of ancient oak trees, while the familiar sound of church bells drifts peacefully across the villages below. Imagine yourself standing once more in the small village of Domremy. The houses are simple. The paths remain narrow. The fields stretch toward the horizon, just as they did centuries ago. The world has changed beyond recognition. Yet this peaceful corner of France still carries echoes of a young girl whose footsteps once crossed these very meadows. History has already carried us through Joan's childhood. her remarkable journey to Chinon, the lifting of the siege of Orléans, the coronation at Reims, her capture, her trial, and the long process that restored her good name. Yet there are still remarkable facts that seem almost impossible to believe. One of the most surprising is this. Joan of Arc spent less than 2 years in the public eye. From the moment she first appeared before Charles VII until her capture at Compiègne, only a short period had passed. Many people who shape history spend decades building their influence. Joan changed the course of a kingdom before reaching her 20th birthday. Imagine how brief 2 years truly are. A child enters school. A family moves to a new home. A garden grows through 2 springs. It is not a long time. Yet within those months, Joan helped inspire victories that altered the direction of the 100 Years' War forever. Another astonishing fact is that she never wrote a famous book. She founded no political movement. She established no lasting military institution. Instead, her influence came almost entirely through her presence, her words, and the confidence she inspired in others. Sometimes history changes because one person helps many people believe again. That kind of influence leaves no monument of stone. It lives in memory. Imagine a quiet campfire after sunset. A group of aging soldiers sit together many years after the battles have ended. They speak softly about places they once marched, about friends they lost, about victories they never expected. Soon, someone mentions Joan. The conversation grows thoughtful. Each man remembers her differently. Yet all agree that something about her presence changed the atmosphere around them. Modern historians often describe morale as one of the least visible forces in history. It cannot be measured like the height of a castle wall or the size of an army. Yet morale often determines whether people continue despite hardship. Joan became a remarkable source of that quiet strength. Another fact that surprises many readers concerns the survival of her words. Because the trial records were copied so carefully, historians possess hundreds of Joan's own answers. Few medieval women, and very few ordinary villagers, left behind such a detailed record of their thoughts. Imagine a medieval scribe sitting patiently beside a window. Sunlight falls across fresh parchment. Every careful stroke of his quill preserves another sentence. He cannot possibly imagine that scholars, students, and readers 600 years later will still study the pages before him. History often depends upon people who never expect recognition. Another remarkable fact involves Joan's appearance. Many paintings show her with flowing hair beneath shining armor. In reality, contemporary evidence suggests she wore her hair cut short in a style more practical beneath a helmet. This was highly unusual for women of her time. Her appearance reflected practicality rather than fashion. It also became one of the many details discussed during her trial. Imagine the armorer carefully fitting her helmet. Loose hair would have become uncomfortable beneath heavy metal. Every practical decision mattered. Life on campaign demanded simplicity. Another surprising detail is that no authenticated portrait of Joan made during her lifetime survives. Every familiar image we see today was created later by artists imagining her appearance. Some portray her with gentle features. Others present a stronger face. Each reflects the imagination of a different age. The real Joan remains known primarily through written testimony rather than painted likenesses. Perhaps that is fitting. Her words have endured more clearly than her face. Imagine walking through an art gallery centuries later. Each painting shows a different Joan, yet none can claim complete certainty. The young woman herself remains quietly beyond the reach of every artist. Only history continues to speak. Another astonishing fact concerns her sword. Many legends surround it, especially the sword said to have been discovered behind the altar of the Church of St. Catherine at Fierbois. Contemporary records indicate that Joan did indeed receive such a sword after describing its location. What became of it afterward remains uncertain. Like many objects from the Middle Ages, it disappeared into history. The banner she carried suffered the same fate. Neither survives today. Their absence reminds us that history often preserves stories more faithfully than possessions. Imagine opening an old wooden chest inside a forgotten castle. Time has taken almost everything. The banners have faded. The weapons have rusted away. The letters have grown fragile. Yet the memories remain. One final remarkable fact before our journey continues is perhaps the most extraordinary of all. Joan never claimed perfection. Throughout her testimony, she acknowledged uncertainty about many ordinary matters. She admitted when she did not know something. She refused to invent answers simply to satisfy her judges. When asked questions she believed she should not answer, she simply said so. Such honesty appears repeatedly throughout the surviving records. Modern readers often admire this quiet confidence. She knew the difference between certainty and speculation. That wisdom remains valuable today. Imagine sitting beneath the evening sky outside the village church in Domremy. The bells ring softly once more. The stars slowly appear above the peaceful countryside. A gentle breeze moves through the tall grass exactly as it did centuries ago. The same moon rises over the fields. The same rivers continue flowing toward distant seas. The world changes. Empires rise and fall. Generations come and go. Yet some stories continue whispering through history with quiet strength. Joan of Arc's life reminds us that greatness does not always begin in places of power. Sometimes it begins in a small village where an ordinary family works the land, where church bells mark the passing hours, and where a young girl quietly believes that even the most impossible path may one day unfold before her. Her story has never belonged only to France. It has become part of the shared history of the world. And although centuries have passed since her footsteps echoed along the roads of medieval France, her courage, humility, and unwavering conviction continue to invite each new generation to pause, reflect, and quietly wonder how one ordinary life could leave such an extraordinary mark upon history. Night settles softly across the valleys of France. The final light of the day slowly disappears beyond distant hills, leaving behind a sky filled with quiet stars. A gentle breeze moves through ancient forests, across peaceful rivers, and over fields that have been planted and harvested by countless generations. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell marks the passing hour, just as it did 600 years ago. Imagine yourself sitting beside a small window, overlooking the countryside. The fire burns gently nearby. Outside, the world has grown wonderfully still. It is the perfect moment to look back upon the remarkable journey we have shared. We began in a tiny farming village called Domremy. There, Joan of Arc lived the ordinary life of a peasant girl. She helped her family. She attended church. She walked quiet country paths and listened to the sounds of birds, flowing water, and the steady rhythm of village life. Nothing about her surroundings suggested that history would one day remember her name across the world. Yet history has a gentle habit of finding extraordinary people in the most ordinary places. One of the greatest facts that still seems almost impossible to believe is that Joan never expected wealth, comfort, or lasting fame. Throughout the surviving records, there is almost no evidence that she sought personal reward. She accepted danger. She accepted hardship. She accepted uncertainty. But she never asked for riches. That quiet humility has become one of the strongest threads running through her story. Imagine walking once more beside the narrow lanes of Domremy. The same streams continue flowing. The same fields welcome the changing seasons. Children still laugh beneath wide skies. Farmers still greet the sunrise before beginning their work. Although centuries have passed, nature has changed very little. Perhaps Joan herself would still recognize the rhythm of the countryside. Another remarkable fact concerns the lasting accuracy of memory. Historians sometimes expect details to disappear over long periods of time. Yet Joan's retrial gathered testimony from dozens upon dozens of people who had known her personally. Neighbors remembered her kindness. Soldiers remembered her courage. Priests remembered her devotion. Family members remembered her childhood. Although no witness remembered everything in exactly the same way, their memories often complemented one another with remarkable consistency. Imagine elderly villagers gathering together many years after Joan's death. Their hair has turned white. Their hands carry the marks of decades of work. Some lean upon wooden walking sticks. Others sit quietly beside the church where they once prayed as children. One by one, they tell their memories. Not to become famous. Not to write books. Simply because they remember. History often survives through quiet voices like these. One astonishing fact that many people overlook is how modern Joan's story can sometimes feel. She questioned authority when she believed she had a reason. She remained respectful without abandoning her convictions. She admitted when she did not know something. She accepted responsibility for her own words. She continued speaking honestly, even when honesty carried enormous personal cost. These qualities do not belong only to one century. They speak across generations. Picture yourself opening one of the preserved manuscripts containing her trial. The parchment has darkened with age. The ink has faded slightly. Yet the words remain. Across 600 years, Joan continues answering questions. She continues explaining her beliefs. She continues surprising readers with her intelligence, humility, and remarkable calm. Few people from the Middle Ages speak to us so directly. Another extraordinary fact is that Joan became a symbol long after her own lifetime. Different generations saw different meanings in her story. To some, she represented courage. To others, faith. To others still, hope during difficult times. Artists painted her. Poets wrote about her. Composers created music inspired by her life. novelists imagined conversations she might have had. Filmmakers brought her story to new audiences. Historians continued returning to the original documents, always asking fresh questions while respecting the surviving evidence. Every age discovered something new. Imagine centuries passing like quiet seasons. Kings come and go. Castles slowly weather beneath rain and wind. New inventions change everyday life. Candles give way to electric lights. Horse-drawn carts disappear beneath the sound of engines. Messages that once required weeks of travel now circle the globe in moments. Still, Joan's story remains. That endurance is itself extraordinary. Another remarkable milestone arrived many centuries after her death. In 1909, the Catholic Church declared Joan blessed. Then, in 1920, she was officially recognized as a saint. Nearly 500 years had passed since her execution. Imagine the quiet village of Domremy, hearing those distant echoes across time. The child who once walked barefoot through muddy fields had become one of the most honored figures in Christian history. Churches around the world now carried her name. Pilgrims traveled to places connected with her life. Children learned her story in classrooms far beyond France. Few could have imagined such a future while watching the young Joan help with ordinary farm work. One final fact seems almost impossible to believe. Despite everything written about Joan of Arc, historians still continue discovering new ways to understand her life. Not because the basic events are unknown. Those are well documented. Rather, each generation asks different questions. Military historians study her influence on morale. Legal historians examine her trial. Religious historians explore her faith. Social historians investigate the daily life of medieval villages. Psychologists wonder about her extraordinary confidence. Linguists study the language preserved in the trial records. No single discipline fully explains her. She belongs to all of them. Perhaps that is one reason her story continues living. Imagine returning one final time to the peaceful fields of Domremy. The sun is setting. Long shadows stretch across the meadows. Swallows glide gracefully above the quiet river. A shepherd gathers his flock for the evening. The air carries the gentle scent of fresh grass and wood smoke. The church bell rings once more. It is the same sound Joan herself would have heard countless evenings during her childhood. In that simple moment, history feels wonderfully close. Not because castles still stand, not because ancient armor survives, but because ordinary life continues. People still hope. They still wonder. They still search for purpose. They still find courage in unexpected places. Joan of Arc reminds us that history is not shaped only by those born into greatness. Sometimes it is shaped by a young woman from a quiet farming village who remained faithful to what she believed, even when the road before her seemed impossible. Whether one approaches her story through faith, history, or simple curiosity, her life continues to invite reflection rather than certainty. She left behind no palace, no dynasty, no fortune. Instead, she left something far more enduring: a story. A voice preserved on fragile parchment, a quiet example of conviction joined with humility. And perhaps, as the stars slowly fill the peaceful French sky one final time, that is the most remarkable fact of all. 6 centuries have passed since Joan of Arc walked the roads of medieval France. The kingdoms have changed. The battlefields have grown green again. The soldiers are long gone. Yet the gentle echo of her story still travels across the world, inviting us to remember that even the most extraordinary chapters of history often begin with an ordinary person taking one quiet step forward. As the night grows deeper and the countryside settles into peaceful silence, our journey through Joan of Arc's remarkable life gently comes to an end. May the calm echoes of medieval France remain with you, like the distant ringing of an old church bell, carried softly upon the evening wind.